Ben had always loved the quiet solitude of the forest. A shy, adventurous child, he often spent hours playing among the tall trees, running through the thick underbrush and climbing rocks. Today was no different. He had wandered farther than usual, exploring a new part of the forest that was tucked away behind a hill. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. It felt peaceful, almost magical, but Ben had no idea that this day would change his life forever. Suddenly, the air around him grew still. The birds stopped chirping, and the leaves stopped rustling. Ben's senses tingled with an odd feeling of unease, like something was watching him. He paused, looking around, but there was nothing to see. The forest was empty, or so it seemed. Without warning, a soft humming noise filled the air, faint at first, but growing louder with every passing second. Ben's heart raced as the ground beneath him seemed to vibrate. He looked up, squinting against the sunlight, and saw a strange shadow in the sky, a shape dark and ominous, moving silently through the air. At first it seemed like a bird, but it was far too large and too still. His breath caught in his throat as the object began to descend, slowly at first, then faster, as though it had locked onto him. The ship was unlike anything Ben had ever seen in books or movies. It was sleek, metallic, and shimmered with an odd glow, as though it was cloaked in some sort of energy field. It moved with eerie grace, floating down through the trees like a predator stalking its prey. The ship was invisible to the naked eye at first, its advanced cloaking technology hiding it from view. But as it neared, the shimmering outlines of its form began to appear, and the humming noise became a loud, pulsing thrum. Ben tried to scream, but the words caught in his throat. His eyes widened in terror as the massive object loomed over him. A cold, metallic beam shot out from the underside of the ship, its edges glowing brightly. The beam surrounded him, pulling him upward with an invisible force. Ben felt himself rise off the ground, panic flooding his chest. His feet kicked helplessly in the air as the force of the beam lifted him higher and higher. In that instant, a surge of fear gripped his heart. His tiny arms flailed, but it was no use. The beam's grip was too strong, pulling him upward toward the belly of the ship. He let out a frantic shout, but his voice was drowned by the roar of the wind as he was pulled higher still. His scream echoed through the trees, but no one heard it. The ship, cloaked once more in its shimmering invisibility, rose quickly into the sky, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. The forest was once again quiet, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the wind, as though nothing had ever happened. Ben was gone. Back on Earth, the disappearance of the child went unnoticed at first. It wasn't until later, when a missing person report was filed, that the government began to piece together the puzzle. It was then that the first whispers of an alien abduction began to surface. But there was no evidence, no wreckage, no trace of the strange ship, and no sign of any unusual activity in the area. It was as though the child had vanished into thin air. Unknown to the Earth authorities, far above in the vast expanse of space, Ben was being taken aboard an alien vessel. Dr. HFY, a scientist from the Atranian Empire, stood before the control panel, his sharp alien eyes studying the strange child who had been brought aboard. HFY was known for his brilliant mind, his advanced knowledge of alien biology and technology. His race, the Atranians, were one of the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, and HFY was a respected leader among them. Yet even he was confused by what he saw. The child was human, no doubt about it, but there was something strange about him. HFY's advanced scanners couldn't seem to penetrate the child's biology fully. The child's DNA didn't match anything in his extensive database of known species. HFY had encountered many different life forms in his travels across the stars, but this human child was unlike anything he had studied before. Even more puzzling was the resilience of the child's body. HFY's scans should have been able to read every minute detail of the child's biology, every strand of DNA, every cellular process. But for some reason, the scans kept returning incomplete data. There was something about the child that seemed to interfere with the ship's systems, something beyond HFY's understanding. He had never encountered a species like this before. Ben, of course, had no idea what was happening. He was terrified, confused, and completely unaware of the alien world he was now being pulled into. He looked around in a daze as he was carried into a large, cold chamber. The walls were made of smooth silver metal that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with an unfamiliar smell, a mixture of sterile machinery and something else, something that made his stomach churn. The child had no way of knowing that he was now at the mercy of beings from another world, beings far more powerful than anything on Earth. But HFY saw something in him. There was something special about this child, something that had triggered an instinct in the scientist. Despite the confusion and the fear, HFY felt a strange sense of responsibility for the human child. Perhaps it was the innocence in Ben's eyes, or perhaps it was the rare nature of the child's DNA. But for the first time in a long while, HFY felt something other than cold logic. He would keep the child. He would study him. But he would also protect him. Back on Earth, the situation was escalating. As soon as the military learned of the missing child's disappearance, a global investigation was launched. Governments around the world began to panic. They knew that this was no ordinary case of a missing child. Reports from various sources, all conflicting, spoke of strange lights in the sky and mysterious objects moving at incredible speeds through the atmosphere. Some spoke of sightings of cloaked ships, but there was no concrete evidence. The authorities were desperate for answers, but they were stumbling in the dark. Every attempt to locate the child failed. Satellite images showed nothing unusual. Ground searches turned up empty. Meanwhile, rumors of an alien threat began to spread. The possibility of a threat from extraterrestrial forces could no longer be ignored. Suspense was building on Earth. Governments were scrambling to understand what had happened, while military forces were quietly preparing for what they feared was an incoming attack. But the truth was far stranger than they could imagine. As HFY continued his study of the child, he remained unaware of the mounting tensions on Earth. He didn't know that the Earth's leaders were now preparing for war, believing that the aliens who had taken the child might soon come to claim Earth itself. Ben's kidnapping had set in motion a chain of events that would soon escalate into something much larger than any of them could have predicted. As the days passed aboard the Atranian ship, Ben's fear gradually began to subside. The vast and cold metallic corridors of the ship, once a source of terror, now felt more familiar to him. He still didn't understand why he was here or who these strange beings were, but he began to realize that not all of them were hostile. One figure, in particular, stood out to him, Dr. HFY. At first, the alien scientist had seemed cold and distant, treating Ben like an object of study rather than a child. But as the days went on, something began to change. HFY's analytical mind had never encountered anything like this before. The child, small and fragile by comparison to his advanced race, possessed an inner strength that fascinated him. While other species would have crumbled under the stress of being taken from their homeworld, Ben exhibited an unexplainable emotional resilience. It wasn't just physical. Ben had been frightened and confused, but he also showed an incredible ability to endure emotional strain. Despite the trauma of being taken from Earth, he didn't break. He didn't cry for help. Instead, Ben showed an inner calm that left HFY puzzled. The child never flinched at the strange alien machinery or the advanced technology surrounding him. He accepted it all with an odd, quiet strength that the scientist couldn't fully comprehend. In the quiet moments, when HFY wasn't busy with his research, he would observe Ben. The child's soft, dark eyes, full of wonder and confusion, seemed to see him in a way no one else ever had. He had no fear of the alien scientist. He didn't know to fear him. One day, after a particularly long research session, HFY was sitting by his control panel, reviewing the data collected on Ben. The child had been sitting on a chair nearby, playing with a small piece of alien technology HFY had given him. It was a harmless toy, designed to keep Ben entertained. But suddenly, Ben looked up, his dark eyes locking with the scientist's, and said something that caught him off guard. "You're my guardian, right?" HFY froze. The word felt strange to him, unfamiliar in its simplicity yet profound in its weight. The child had used the word as though it were something natural, something obvious. HFY had never been called a guardian before. He was a scientist, a scholar, an explorer of the galaxy, but never a protector. Yet, in that moment, the word resonated within him. The bond between them, however unspoken, was beginning to take shape. HFY realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he didn't want to harm the child. "Guardian?" HFY repeated slowly, his voice almost curious. "You see me as a guardian." Ben smiled faintly, his innocence shining through. "Yeah, you take care of me. You're not mean." The simplicity of the statement hit HFY harder than he expected. He had never considered himself capable of care, especially for a species so different from his own. Yet, as the days passed, he found himself growing protective of the boy, shielding him from the complexities of the ship's inner workings and the prying eyes of his fellow Atranians. But there was still much to learn. HFY's experiments on Ben continued, though his methods had begun to soften. He no longer treated Ben like an object to be dissected, but more like a companion, someone he could try to understand. The more HFY studied, the more he found that Ben was unlike any being he had ever encountered. One day, during one of their daily interactions, something strange happened. Ben had been playing with a piece of alien technology when suddenly, the device began to glow. A faint shimmer of light hovered around Ben's small hands, as if the very air was reacting to him. HFY watched in awe as Ben, unconsciously, began to manipulate the energy flowing from the device. The light twisted, coiling around his fingers before fading away. HFY was stunned. It was as if the child had just tapped into some kind of latent ability, one that defied all understanding. The Atranian race was one of the most advanced in the galaxy, their technology far beyond anything Earth had ever dreamed of. Yet Ben was displaying an unexplainable control over energy itself, something that even HFY couldn't comprehend. "Ben," HFY called softly, his voice tinged with curiosity. "What did you just do?" Ben looked up, a bit surprised. "I don't know. It just felt right." HFY approached him slowly, examining the child's hands as though he could somehow detect the source of this newfound ability. The child's DNA didn't make sense. Nothing about Ben's biology should have allowed him to interact with energy in such a way. The child wasn't just resilient emotionally. He was also becoming something far more. HFY continued his research, but he was no longer focused solely on Ben's biological makeup. Now, he was studying the child's energy manipulation, a phenomenon that could prove to be a breakthrough in alien science. He had seen nothing like it in any other species, human or alien. But as HFY delved deeper, an alarm suddenly blared across the ship. A sharp, shrill sound pierced the silence, causing HFY to pause and glance at the control panel. His face, usually calm and collected, tightened as he saw the warning lights flashing. The ship had automatically sent out an alert to the Atranian High Command, triggered by an unknown defense protocol within the ship. HFY quickly ran to the console, his mind racing. The message was clear. The child, Ben, was linked to a dangerous new weapon. The report, written in the cold, impersonal language of the Atranian military, described the unexpected energy manipulation capabilities that Ben had displayed. It suggested that the child might possess abilities far beyond what HFY had initially realized, abilities that could potentially disrupt the balance of power in the galaxy. The High Command was already aware of Ben's presence aboard the ship, and now they had received this disturbing new information. If the Atranian leadership learned what Xurathal had discovered, what Ben was capable of, there was no telling what they would do next. Meanwhile, on Earth, the news of Ben's disappearance had taken a darker turn. The military had begun to piece together the strange phenomena surrounding the child's abduction, and Earth's best scientists had begun working with military leaders to reverse engineer technology recovered from previous alien encounters. Working tirelessly, Earth's defense teams had begun building countermeasures, reverse engineering alien technology, and preparing to intercept the ship that had taken Ben. Satellite scans revealed strange patterns in the sky, indicating the presence of an unknown craft. While the world still struggled to understand what had happened to Ben, the authorities were beginning to prepare for a confrontation they could barely comprehend. The suspense continued to build. Earth's governments were starting to realize that this was not just about a missing child. It was about something far greater. Ben was at the center of it all, unknowingly the key to a power that could either save or destroy them all. As the situation grew more tense, both Xurathal and the people of Earth were beginning to understand that the fate of the universe might depend on what would happen next. Xurathal's bond with the child had grown stronger, but now the stakes were higher. The child was no longer just an anomaly to be studied. He was a symbol of something much more, something the galaxy's greatest powers were beginning to take notice of. And soon, Xurathal would have to choose whether to protect Ben or let him become a pawn in a much larger game. The sun was just beginning to rise over Earth as a new day began, but for humanity, it felt like a dark cloud was about to eclipse everything. The disappearance of young Ben had ignited widespread panic, not just in his family, but across the entire world. People were gripped by fear, uncertainty, and confusion. No one knew where he had gone or why. All they knew was that an alien ship had appeared from nowhere, whisking him away without a trace. Earth's military was on high alert. Governments across the globe had declared the incident a full-blown emergency, and a covert mission was swiftly put into motion. The child's abduction was being framed as the beginning of a larger threat from the Atranian Empire, one of the galaxy's most technologically advanced alien civilizations. Earth's leaders were convinced the aliens had abducted Ben for some nefarious purpose, perhaps to use him as a pawn in their quest for domination. Xurathal, on the other hand, was caught in a whirlwind of confusion and fear. He had never imagined things would escalate this far. He thought he could protect the child. Ben had come to trust him, even call him guardian. Xurthal's heart had begun to soften toward the child, and the thought of him being caught in the middle of an intergalactic war was unbearable. Yet he was helpless. The communication channels were flooded with mistrust, and Earth's diplomats were increasingly suspicious of his intentions. In private meetings with his superiors, Xurathal tried to reassure Earth's representatives that the child was not being held for malicious reasons. He had studied Ben's behavior, and it became evident that the child's unique abilities were something far beyond what Earth or any other alien species had ever encountered. But despite his reassurances, the leaders on Earth were too paranoid to trust him. They were terrified that the aliens had taken Ben for a reason they couldn't yet understand, maybe to experiment on him, maybe to use him as a weapon, or worse, to enslave humanity. The thought of losing control over Ben was enough to push Earth's military into action. The tension grew unbearable. Earth's space forces, fueled by the belief that the Atranian Empire had nefarious plans for Ben, started preparing to launch a full-scale attack. They had no evidence to suggest that the aliens had hostile intentions, but the truth didn't seem to matter anymore. The abduction alone was enough to make Earth's leaders take a drastic step. War was looming on the horizon. Xurathal was caught between his loyalty to his people and his growing attachment to Ben. It was a dilemma that gnawed at him day and night. On one hand, he had a duty to his species, to protect the Atranian Empire and its interests. But on the other, he had developed a bond with Ben that transcended anything he had ever felt before. He had watched the boy grow stronger, more capable, and far more resilient than any human he had ever studied. Ben's innocence, his natural ability to overcome the hardships he faced, had earned Xurthel's respect and affection. He could not bear the thought of him being caught in the crossfire of a war that could destroy everything. But despite his best efforts to calm the rising tensions, Earth's military launched their offensive. It wasn't long before Earth's warships were in deep space, making their way toward the Atranian ship that held Ben. The ships moved at incredible speeds, their engines blazing with energy as they closed in on their target. Sir, Hal's ship was still cloaked, but he could sense the incoming danger. His ship, a marvel of alien technology, could hide itself from even the most sophisticated tracking systems, but there was only so much it could do. Xurthal knew that Earth's forces weren't going to stand down. They had made up their minds. Ben had been taken by aliens for some dark purpose, and they would do whatever it took to reclaim him. It was a mistake, one based on fear and misinformation, but it was already too late to turn back. As the warships neared, Xurthal made a decision. His ship would retreat into deep space, far away from the Earth's military, to avoid a confrontation that could easily escalate into a full-scale war. He hoped with all his heart that this would be enough to prevent bloodshed, but there was no guarantee. The human forces were determined, and the Atranian Empire was not known for its patience. Ben, unaware of the growing conflict, had no idea what was happening. He had spent his days aboard the alien ship, trying to adjust to his strange new life. While Xurthal treated him with care, there were moments when Ben's curiosity got the best of him. He wanted to know more about the ship, more about the beings who had taken him. But every time he asked questions, Xurthal grew more distant. The scientist's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, caught between his desire to protect the child and his responsibilities to his people. The ship was silent as Xurthal watched the Earth warships approach from the bridge. His hands trembled slightly as he turned to the control panel. There was a pressing need to act quickly. The threat of imminent attack hung over him like a shadow. The child's fate, as well as the fate of an entire species, now depended on a single decision. Ben, sitting in his quarters, heard the faint hum of the ship's alarms go off. He knew something was wrong, but his innocence kept him from understanding the full weight of the situation. He was playing with a toy when a sudden tremor shook the ship, knocking him off balance. His heart raced. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew something was wrong. He stumbled into the hallway, his small hands clutching the edges of the walls for support. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Xurthal was making a final attempt to communicate with Earth's leadership, hoping to avoid conflict. His message was clear. The child is not a weapon. He is not a threat. I ask you, as a scientist and a guardian, to reconsider your path. But even as he sent the message, Xurthal knew that Earth's forces were already too far gone to listen. The first shots had been fired, and the clock was ticking. The two forces, human and alien, were now on a collision course, caught in a deadly game of misunderstanding and fear. Both sides believed they were protecting something valuable, something they couldn't afford to lose. And at the heart of it all was Ben, the boy who had unknowingly triggered a chain of events that would forever change the course of history. As Earth's ships drew closer, Xurthal had no choice but to activate his ship's cloaking technology. The ship vanished from sight, its presence all but erased from the vastness of space. It was the only way to ensure Ben's safety for the moment. But the war was inevitable. The deception, the fear, and the chaos had already begun. There was no turning back now. The stage was set for a devastating battle, one that could ignite an interstellar war, and Xurthal's moral struggle would soon reach its breaking point. His bond with Ben, the child he had come to love and protect, would be tested in ways he never imagined, and the fate of both humanity and the Atranian Empire hung in the balance. The air was thick with tension, a sharp, oppressive feeling that seemed to hang over Earth's orbit. The situation had escalated beyond anyone's control. What started as a simple abduction was now a full-blown conflict that could change the fate of two worlds forever. Sci-Fi had never anticipated this. What he had hoped to be a peaceful mission to study and care for a mysterious child had spiraled into an intergalactic war. But the moment Earth's forces launched their attack, it was clear that there would be no going back. The battle began with a flash, a blinding streak of light that split the dark emptiness of space. Earth's fleet, composed of massive warships and sleek fighter crafts, charged forward, their weapons primed and ready. HFY's ship, cloaked and silent, suddenly deactivated its camouflage, revealing its advanced, intimidating structure. The Atranian vessel was a marvel of alien engineering, capable of cloaking itself from even the most sophisticated detection systems. But now, there was no hiding. The Atranian ship emerged like a giant predator, ready to face its opponents head-on. The two sides clashed with a ferocity that rocked the void of space. Earth's ships were formidable, but the Atranian Empire's technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. HFY's ship deployed its AI-controlled drones, sleek machines that moved with incredible precision, cutting through space like shadows. These drones were equipped with energy shields and weapons that could decimate anything in their path. They swarmed around Earth's warships, laser blasts lighting up the dark expanse like distant stars. Every collision of energy was a spectacle, a dance of destruction that seemed to stretch the limits of what was possible in battle. The warships zoomed past each other at impossible speeds, their engines screaming in the vacuum of space. Laser blasts flew like shooting stars, illuminating the darkness of the battlefield. The blasts were deafening, echoing in the cold void as they tore through metal, setting off fiery explosions. Ships were blown apart in an instant, their wreckage spinning into nothingness. Earth's warships fought back with everything they had, unleashing wave after wave of missiles and laser fire. The air was crackling with the sound of war. Yet, in the middle of this chaos, HFY's primary concern remained the safety of the child. Ben, still unaware of the significance of what was happening, remained hidden in the depths of the ship. HFY had made sure to keep the boy out of sight, knowing that his presence would only add fuel to the fire. The child had no idea that he was the reason for this war. He had no idea that his very existence had become a symbol of something much larger than himself. But the fighting didn't stop. It only grew more intense. As Earth's forces pushed forward, HFY was forced to make decisions that pained him deeply. He had to defend his ship, his people, and the child he had come to care for. But as the battle raged on, something darker began to settle in. The realization that Ben, the innocent child who had trusted him, was now at the heart of an intergalactic conflict shook HFY to his core. In the midst of the chaos, HFY's closest companion, Bonner, was killed. Bonner had been with him for years, a trusted ally who had stood by his side through countless battles. But now, as a burst of laser fire tore through the side of the Atranian ship, Bonner was gone. The loss hit HFY hard. He had always been a scientist, driven by logic and reasoning, but the pain of losing his companion stirred something in him that he had long suppressed. He was no longer just a scientist. He was a guardian, and he had lost someone dear to him. His heart heavy with grief, HFY continued to pilot the ship, his eyes locked on the battle unfolding before him. Earth's forces were relentless, pushing forward with all their might. Yet, as much as HFY fought to protect Ben and his people, he knew that he was losing the battle, both in space and within himself. Amidst the destruction, something unexpected happened. Ben, who had been hiding deep inside the ship, found himself caught in the chaos. In his attempts to escape the destruction around him, he stumbled into a forgotten part of the ship. There, he found something extraordinary, an ancient artifact, unlike anything he had seen before. It was an object of immense power, a relic from a time long past. Unaware of its significance, Ben reached out and touched the artifact, triggering a massive surge of energy. The energy from the artifact was unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. It sent a shockwave through the ship, causing a cascade of lights and alarms to flash. The ship shook violently, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The artifact had activated, and its signal was broadcast throughout space. The energy it emitted was so powerful that it reached beyond the Atranian ship, detectable by both Earth's forces and the Atranian Empire. For the first time, the true nature of the war became clear. Ben's accidental activation of the artifact had done more than just send a signal. It had revealed the existence of a weapon far beyond what either side could imagine. The artifact was not just a relic. It was a key to something much more powerful. Its energy could change the course of history, and both Earth and the Atranian Empire now realize that whoever controlled it would control the future of humanity and the galaxy itself. As both Earth and Atranian forces detected the signal, they quickly adjusted their strategies. Earth's military commanders saw this as their chance to gain the upper hand, believing that capturing the artifact would guarantee their dominance. Meanwhile, the Atranian Empire knew that this was their ultimate advantage, the key to securing their power over the universe. Exirthal's heart sank as he realized the magnitude of what had just happened. The artifact was the key to everything. The reason behind the war, the reason behind Ben's abduction, and now the reason behind the destruction that was unfolding. He could no longer protect Ben from the consequences of the conflict. The war was no longer just about an innocent child. It was about the future of entire civilizations. Ben, still unaware of the artifact's significance, wandered through the ship, his mind racing with fear and confusion. He had no idea that his small mistake had triggered a series of events that could reshape the galaxy. He was just a child, trying to survive in a situation he didn't understand. But as the realization of what he had done began to dawn on him, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The battle continued to rage, both sides relentless in their pursuit of the artifact. The fate of two worlds, of entire civilizations, now rested on the shoulders of a single child, and the decisions made by those who cared for him. As Exirtal watched the war unfold, he knew that the path forward was unclear. The future of humanity, the Atranian Empire, and perhaps the galaxy itself depended on the choices that would be made in the coming moments. Would peace be possible, or was this the beginning of a war that could destroy everything? Only time would tell. The war had reached its climax. Earth's forces, after days of relentless pursuit, had finally prepared to launch one last assault on the Atranian ship. The mission was clear: destroy the alien vessel and capture Ben at any cost. Tensions were at an all-time high, and the fate of the galaxy seemed to hang in the balance. On one side, Earth's military, determined to protect their home and their people. On the other, the Atranian Empire, whose motivations remained clouded in mystery, but whose power was unmatched. At the center of it all was Ben, the young child who had unintentionally sparked this intergalactic conflict. But what no one knew was that the greatest weapon of all was not the ships or the technology. They were all dwarfed by the influence of a single child. Exirtal stood at the helm of his ship, his mind racing. The warships of Earth were closing in fast, their weapons primed and ready for battle. He could hear the hum of the ship's engines as the battle preparations continued, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. The chaos, the destruction, it had all spiraled out of control. He had hoped to save Ben, to protect him from the madness that had consumed both sides. But now he realized there was no way to avoid the inevitable clash unless something changed, and quickly. With Ben by his side, Exirtal moved through the ship's corridors, heading towards the central command center. He needed to try one last time to communicate with Earth. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for peace. But deep down, he knew that the final decision would not lie with him alone. It would be with the child, the one who had unknowingly caused this war, the one who still held the key to stopping it. As they reached the central command center, Exirtal looked down at Ben, whose eyes were wide with fear, but also a strange understanding. Despite everything, the child had remained calm, as if he could sense the enormity of the moment. For the first time, Exirithal truly saw the depth of Ben's innocence, and he wondered if there was still hope, not just for him, but for the future of all the beings involved in this war. Ben's small hand reached out, gently tugging at Exirithal sleeve. "Guardian," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "We don't have to fight. I can feel the pain, the anger. We all just want to stop hurting each other." Exirithal heart clenched at the words. He had never considered what it must have been like for Ben, caught in the middle of a war he couldn't understand, dragged into a conflict that he never asked for. But Ben's words carried something more than just innocence. They carried wisdom. Wisdom that even Exirithal, an experienced scientist, could not ignore. The alien scientist looked down at the child, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. "Ben, you are more powerful than you know," he said softly. "You have the power to change everything." Ben nodded, his face serious. He had spent weeks aboard the Atranian ship, learning things that he never thought possible, things that had awakened something within him, a connection to the ship itself. He had always been a curious child, but now he felt a deep, almost instinctual understanding of how the ship's systems worked. It was as if the ship, with all its advanced technology, had become an extension of his own mind. Exirith's heart sank as he realized the magnitude of what had just happened. The artifact was the key to everything. The reason behind the war, the reason behind Ben's abduction, and now the reason behind the destruction that was unfolding. He could no longer protect Ben from the consequences of the conflict. The war was no longer just about an innocent child. It was about the future of entire civilizations. Ben, still unaware of the artifact's significance, wandered through the ship, his mind racing with fear and confusion. He had no idea that his small mistake had triggered a series of events that could reshape the galaxy. He was just a child, trying to survive in a situation he didn't understand. But as the realization of what he had done began to dawn on him, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The battle continued to rage, both sides relentless in their pursuit of the artifact. The fate of two worlds, of entire civilizations, now rested on the shoulders of a single child, and the decisions made by those who cared for him. As Exirithal watched the war unfold, he knew that the path forward was unclear. The future of humanity, the Atranian Empire, and perhaps the galaxy itself depended on the choices that would be made in the coming moments. Would peace be possible, or was this the beginning of a war that could destroy everything? Only time would tell. The war had reached its climax. Earth's forces, after days of relentless pursuit, had finally prepared to launch one last assault on the Atranian ship. The mission was clear: destroy the alien vessel and capture Ben at any cost. Tensions were at an all-time high, and the fate of the galaxy seemed to hang in the balance. On one side, Earth's military, determined to protect their home and their people. On the other, the Atranian Empire, whose motivations remained clouded in mystery, but whose power was unmatched. At the center of it all was Ben, the young child who had unintentionally sparked this intergalactic conflict. But what no one knew was that the greatest weapon of all was not the ships or the technology. They were all dwarfed by the influence of a single child. Exirithal stood at the helm of his ship, his mind racing. The warships of Earth were closing in fast, their weapons primed and ready for battle. He could hear the hum of the ship's engines as the battle preparations continued, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. The chaos, the destruction, it had all spiraled out of control. He had hoped to save Ben, to protect him from the madness that had consumed both sides. But now he realized there was no way to avoid the inevitable clash unless something changed, and quickly. With Ben by his side, Exirithal moved through the ship's corridors, heading towards the central command center. He needed to try one last time to communicate with Earth. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for peace. But deep down, He knew that the final decision would not lie with him alone. It would be with the child, the one who had unknowingly caused this war, the one who still held the key to stopping it. As they reached the central command center, Exirithal looked down at Ben, whose eyes were wide with fear, but also a strange understanding. Despite everything, the child had remained calm, as if he could sense the enormity of the moment. For the first time, Exirithal truly saw the depth of Ben's innocence, and he wondered if there was still hope, not just for him, but for the future of all the beings involved in this war. Ben's small hand reached out, gently tugging at Exirithal sleeve. "Guardian," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "We don't have to fight. I can feel the pain, the anger. We all just want to stop hurting each other." Exirithal heart clenched at the words. He had never considered what it must have been like for Ben, caught in the middle of a war he couldn't understand, dragged into a conflict that he never asked for. But Ben's words carried something more than just innocence. They carried wisdom. Wisdom that even Exirithal, an experienced scientist, could not ignore. The alien scientist looked down at the child, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. "Ben, you are more powerful than you know," he said softly. "You have the power to change everything." Ben nodded, his face serious. He had spent weeks aboard the Atranian ship, learning things that he never thought possible, things that had awakened something within him, a connection to the ship itself. He had always been a curious child, but now he felt a deep, almost instinctual understanding of how the ship's systems worked. It was as if the ship, with all its advanced technology, had become an extension of his own mind. "I can stop this," Ben said, his voice unwavering. "I can stop the fighting." Exirithal watched, a mixture of awe and disbelief in his eyes, as Ben walked over to the control panel. The alien ship had been designed to respond to its occupants' thoughts, a product of centuries of technological evolution. Ben, somehow, had found a way to tap into that network, interfacing with the ship's core. He placed his hands on the panel, and within moments, the ship's energy systems began to hum. Lights flickered, and a strange calm seemed to settle over the vessel. The weapon systems that had been primed for destruction began to shut down, one by one. Ben's small hands glided across the panel, and the deadly energy pulses, the missiles locked and loaded, and the eye-controlled drones all powered down, as if on command. Exirithal could hardly believe his eyes. The child had done it. He had not only stopped the warship's weapons, but had brought the entire ship to a standstill. "Ben, you've done it," Exirithal whispered, his voice full of reverence and disbelief. But it wasn't just the ship that had been stopped. The energy from Ben's connection rippled out, crossing the vast distance between the Atranian ship and Earth's fleet. The warships that had been preparing to unleash their full might against the alien vessel halted in their tracks. The commanders, all receiving the same strange signal, were forced to pause, their plans interrupted. Earth's military leadership, confused and disoriented, began to question the sudden halt. Was this a trick, or had something changed? Ben's actions had done something else as well. As the weaponry powered down, a sense of peace seemed to settle over the crew of both sides. It was as if the child's innocent plea for peace had reached deep into their hearts, forcing them to question what they were doing. For the first time, both sides saw the futility of the conflict. Earth's leaders, sitting in their war rooms, felt the weight of Ben's actions. Their eyes widened as they realized what had been happening all along. They had been fighting over a child, over a misunderstanding, over a future they hadn't even begun to understand. The child's simple desire for peace had broken through the walls of fear and hatred that had built up over weeks of war. It was the power of compassion, of empathy, and of understanding that had created the tipping point. Both sides now had to face a difficult truth. They could continue down this path of destruction, or they could take a step back and see the bigger picture. Exirithal, watching from the ship's control center, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He had come to care for Ben in a way he had never thought possible. The child had taught him more than any book or study ever could. Ben had shown him the power of emotion, of understanding, of peace. He had shown him the true strength of humanity. As Earth's leaders realized the depth of what had just transpired, they began to reconsider their approach. The alien forces, realizing that their AI-driven directives had been manipulated by human emotion, began to question their own actions. The cold, calculated nature of their plans had faltered in the face of something far more powerful than logic: human emotion, embodied in the form of a child. The Atranian High Command, after much deliberation, came to a reluctant but necessary decision. They would agree to peace talks. The war would end not with a bang, but with a conversation. The child had brought them to the table, and now it was time to listen. Xerthal, deeply moved by the events that had unfolded, knew that his time on Earth was not over. He had seen the strength of humanity, their ability to change, to grow, to adapt. And so, with a new purpose in his heart, he made a decision. "I will stay," he said quietly, turning to Ben. "I will stay on Earth, not as an enemy, but as a diplomat. I will help bridge the gap between our two peoples." Ben, looking up at the alien scientist, smiled. "I think that's a good idea." The final decision had been made, and for the first time in weeks, the galaxy felt like it might finally be at peace. Ben had not only saved his world, but he had also shown both sides what true strength really was. It wasn't in weapons or power. It was in the ability to understand, to empathize, and to choose peace. And with that, the galaxy took its first steps toward a future that was brighter than ever before. The battle had been fierce, the tensions high, and the stakes unimaginable. But now, the dust had settled, and what had seemed like an unstoppable tide of war was slowly being replaced by something else: hope. Earth and the Atranian Empire, once bitter enemies, now stood on the brink of something new. The sky above Earth, once filled with the threat of explosions and destruction, now reflected the light of a new dawn, one that promised peace and cooperation. The alien ships, which had once hovered ominously above Earth, were now descending with a different purpose. This time, the ships did not carry the threat of annihilation. Instead, they were bringing with them the promise of a future that was unimaginable just days ago. A future where two civilizations could work together, not as enemies, but as partners. The Atranian forces, who had once been set on conquest, now had a different mission: to help humanity grow and advance. They were not here to dominate, but to offer their knowledge, their technology, and their resources to help Earth take its place among the stars. Xerthal stood at the forefront, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The ships, sleek and powerful, were descending into Earth's atmosphere, their engines glowing softly. The once ominous sight now held a sense of calm, and Xerthal felt a profound sense of relief. The galaxy had been on the edge of destruction, but now, thanks to the courage of one human child, that destruction had been avoided. Ben had done what no one thought possible. He had not only stopped a war, but had paved the way for an entirely new chapter in the relationship between Earth and the Atranian Empire. As the ships landed, the atmosphere on Earth's surface was one of cautious optimism. The leaders of both sides, once bitter adversaries, now stood side by side, ready to negotiate terms for peace. The world watched as Xerthal and other Atranian diplomats exited their ships, not with weapons drawn, but with open hands, signaling a new beginning. The Atranian soldiers, once poised for battle, now stepped forward with an unfamiliar sense of respect, ready to collaborate with humanity. Their advanced technology, their vast knowledge of the cosmos, it was all now within humanity's reach, a gift to help Earth advance beyond its current limitations. Ben, standing beside Xerthal, looked up at the alien ships with wide eyes. Just a short time ago, he had been an innocent child caught in a misunderstanding that almost destroyed everything. But now he was something else entirely, a symbol of hope, a symbol of what could happen when people or species put aside their differences and chose cooperation over conflict. His presence had brought the two sides together, and his ability to connect with the alien technology had been the turning point, the moment that shifted the tide from war to peace. He had never asked for any of this. All he had wanted was to be safe, to find his way back home. But in the process, he had become something far more important, a bridge between two worlds. A small boy from Earth had helped prevent an intergalactic war and had shown both humans and aliens that there was another way, a way that didn't rely on violence or destruction, but on understanding and empathy. As the two sides began their first discussions, Ben couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He had watched the destruction of the warships, the chaos that had threatened to tear everything apart. But now, as he stood there, surrounded by leaders from both Earth and the Atranian Empire, he realized that the true power had always been in the ability to understand one another. The ability to see past the differences, to realize that despite all the vast distances between them, all the technological advancements, and all the alien cultures, they were all still living beings, capable of love, fear, hope, and compassion. Standing next to Ben, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. It wasn't just the child who had changed the course of history, it was the entire human race. The resilience, the compassion, and the strength that humanity had shown in the face of overwhelming odds had been nothing short of remarkable. The Atranian Empire, once a cold and calculating force, had learned something from the humans. They had learned that strength didn't always come from technology or weapons. It came from the heart. The discussions between the two sides began slowly, with many points of contention still lingering. But with each passing moment, the tone of the talk shifted. What had once seemed impossible, peace between Earth and the Atranian Empire, now felt within reach. Humanity, once the underdog, had proven itself capable of far more than anyone had expected. And the Atranian Empire, once focused solely on conquest and control, had begun to realize that there was more to life than domination. The child, Ben, now stood as a symbol of this change. He had become the living proof that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for something better. His influence had been subtle, yet profound. It wasn't just his ability to interface with the alien technology. It was his innocence, his desire for peace, and his compassion that had brought both sides to the negotiating table. Ben had shown the universe that there was always another way, even when it seemed like there was no hope left. As the days passed, Earth and the Atranian Empire continued their talks. The alien forces, having promised to help humanity grow, began to share their knowledge. Earth's scientists were given access to the advanced technologies that had once seemed so far beyond their reach. The potential for growth was limitless, and with the Atranian Empire's guidance, humanity was poised to enter a new era of exploration and discovery. The galaxy, which had once seemed so vast and untouchable, was now open to them in ways they had never imagined. For Exirithal, this was a new chapter in his own life. He had come to Earth as an enemy, but now he was staying as a friend, as a diplomat working to ensure that peace would continue to reign. He had seen humanity's potential, and he had come to believe that their future would be a bright one, not just for them, but for the entire galaxy. Ben, for his part, had become a symbol not just for humanity, but for the universe as a whole. His journey had begun with fear and confusion, but it had ended with him standing as the unifying force between two species. He had shown both sides that war was never the answer, and that, when given the chance, even the most unlikely of allies could come together for the greater good. As the first signs of a new day appeared on the horizon, Ben and Exirithal stood together, looking out at the peaceful world they had saved. They had come through the darkness and emerged into the light, their futures intertwined in ways they had never imagined. Together, they would help shape a new era of peace and cooperation, one where humanity was no longer the underdog, but a respected member of the intergalactic community. The universe, once on the brink of war, had now become a place of hope. And it was all thanks to the courage of one child, whose actions had proven that peace was not only possible but worth fighting for.